shadows of the cross, the birth of the Teutonic Order in the ashes of Jerusalem, where blood soaked the stones and the air trembled with prayers and cries, a brotherhood was born, bound not by mere faith, but by iron and will. They came to heal, yet they would learn to kill. They came as servants of God, yet became architects of fear. This is the story of the Teutonic Order. The year was 1190. The Crusades had carved scars across the Holy Land, and the city of Acre, like a jewel set in sand and blood, was a battleground of devotion and death. Among the chaos, a small group of German knights and noblemen, moved by the plight of the sick and wounded, established a hospital for pilgrims and soldiers. Their goal was simple, almost naive: to care for the sick, to provide shelter where death loomed. But in the world of the Crusades, charity was a fragile mask. The fires of war demanded more than mercy, they demanded steel. And so, the Teutonic Order, named after their Germanic roots, began its transformation. The healer's mantle became armor. The hands that tended wounds now grasped swords. By 1198, the order had received papal recognition. Its insignia, a black cross on white, burned into history as a symbol of faith, authority, and unyielding discipline. These men were neither monks nor traditional knights. They were something in between, a brotherhood that embraced both prayer and combat, devotion and brutality. Each initiation ceremony was a ritual of devotion, oaths sworn in candlelight, hands pressed upon the cross, hearts pledged to a life of service that demanded obedience, courage, and, above all, loyalty to the order above all else. The early years in the Holy Land shaped the order in ways no battlefield alone could. They tended the sick, defended the hospitals from raids, and wove a network of influence that spanned the Crusader states. But the sands of the Levant were shifting. Muslim forces were reclaiming territory, and the once glorious city of Jerusalem had already fallen. Europe beckoned, not with the promise of safety, but with new lands to conquer, new peoples to convert, and new legends to forge. And so, a decision was made. The Teutonic Knights, once healers in the shadow of the Holy Sepulchre, turned their gaze northward, to the mysterious lands of the Baltic, a wilderness of forests, marshes, and pagan tribes. Here, they would not merely defend, they would conquer. They would carve their legacy into the frozen earth of Prussia, in a world untouched by the Crusader sword, yet no less resistant to it. But this was not merely a march of armies. It was a march of destiny. The Order's banner, the black cross on a white field, would cast a shadow over centuries, inspiring fear, awe, and reverence in equal measure. And as they journeyed north, their identity as warrior monks solidified, blending faith and force, mercy and ruthlessness, into a doctrine that would reshape the Baltic forever. The world they entered was raw and untamed. Dense forests whispered with the secrets of tribes who had never bowed to Rome. Rivers carried legends older than any pope, and winter winds could freeze a man's soul before his body. Yet the knights advanced, their discipline unbroken, their purpose unyielding. Every step northward was a step into legend, every battle a stanza in a story written in steel and blood. And so begins the tale of the Teutonic Order, not as mere crusaders, not merely as healers, but as an unstoppable force that would redefine war, faith, and power in the medieval world. From healers to warriors, the Teutonic transformation. In the quiet of the night, a candle flickers over parchment. A vow is whispered. The hands that once soothed pain now wield swords. Mercy bends beneath steel. This is the moment the Teutonic Order truly begins. The journey northward was more than a geographical shift. It was a metamorphosis. In the Holy Land, their battles were defensive, their healers' hearts still tender. But the forests and marshes of the Baltic demanded a new kind of discipline, a new kind of brutality. The tribes of Prussia and Livonia did not kneel at the sight of a cross. They fought, they ambushed, and they disappeared into woods that seemed endless. To conquer these lands, the knights realized they could no longer rely solely on faith. They needed mastery of war. Under the piercing chill of northern winters, the Order built fortresses from timber and stone, transforming the wilderness into a lattice of strategic strongholds. Each castle was a citadel of faith and fear, a place where the sick could be healed and enemies could be trapped. The Teutonic Knights learned the language of siege, of discipline, of unrelenting strategy. Every recruit was trained in the dual arts of prayer and combat, sword and psalm, devotion and destruction. The transformation was more than tactical. It reshaped the very soul of the Order. Initiates were no longer mere pilgrims or noblemen. They became warrior monks, bound by oaths that demanded obedience to the cross above family, ambition, or self-interest. Daily life was regimented, prayers at dawn, drills by day, and at night, reflection upon the Order's mission. Even the simplest actions, polishing armor, tending wounds, sharpening blades, were infused with ritualistic precision. The first encounters with the Baltic tribes were harsh lessons. Ambushes in mist-shrouded forests, raids on villages, and counterattacks from warriors who knew the land better than any knight tested the Order's mettle. Yet, with every skirmish, the knights learned, adapted, and hardened. Pagan lands slowly fell beneath the weight of disciplined troops, iron discipline, and unflinching resolve. And still, the Order did not shed its origins entirely. Their hospitals remained, albeit fortified. Their chapels remained, albeit within stone walls bristling with arrow slits. Healing and killing existed side by side, each reinforcing the other. The Teutonic Knights had become an enigma, a paradoxical force where mercy coexisted with massacre, where compassion was tempered by conquest. By the mid-13th century, the Teutonic Order had established a network of commanderies across Prussia and Livonia. Each castle was a node of power, each knight a symbol of divine authority. They introduced new laws, enforced conversions, and imposed tribute, shaping the very social fabric of the region. The pagan tribes, once fierce and unbroken, now faced a relentless tide, disciplined and methodical, carrying both the cross and the sword. Yet, even at the height of their ascendancy, the Order's existence was not unchallenged. Rival knights, local lords, and the ever-watchful eyes of neighboring kingdoms watched closely, wary of a power that blurred the line between monk and warrior. The Order was rising, inexorably and inexorably, and with each conquest, its identity as a militant brotherhood of faith and force became sharper, darker, and more unyielding. The Teutonic Knights had begun as healers. They became warriors. And in the lands of frost and forest, they would forge a legacy that would echo through centuries, a legacy of iron, faith, and an unrelenting pursuit of order through blood and devotion. The march to the Baltic, conquest and dominion, where the forests were thick and the rivers ran untamed, a new order marched. The cross on white gleamed in the frost. Every step was a claim, every sword a declaration. The land would bend or break. The Baltic frontier was a realm of mystery, feared by the Western world and sacred to its native tribes. Prussia, Livonia, and the lands beyond were wild, a tangle of forests, bogs, and jagged rivers. Pagan tribes roamed freely, their warriors as skilled in guerrilla tactics as any knight was in formal combat. To the Teutonic Order, this was not merely a mission of faith, it was an opportunity to carve their dominion from untamed lands. The Order's advance was relentless. Fortresses sprang up like steel-laden sentinels in the wilderness. Each castle was more than a defensive structure. It was a statement of intent, a symbol of the iron discipline and divine mandate of the knights within. The knights moved with terrifying efficiency. Scouts patrolled forests, messengers relayed orders across frozen landscapes, and supply lines stretched like arteries pumping life into their war machine. Conflict came swiftly. The Prussians, proud and skilled, resisted with ambushes and guerrilla raids. Yet, the knights were patient, disciplined, and unyielding. Battles were brutal, often fought at dawn in fog or twilight, where the clash of steel rang louder than any prayer. Entire villages were taken as leverage, converting the local population through force or fear. Those who resisted were crushed. Those who submitted were incorporated into the Order's vision. Religion was a weapon as potent as any sword. Conversion to Christianity was not merely encouraged, it was enforced. Pagan temples were torn down, replaced with chapels and fortifications. Pagan rituals were suppressed, replaced with the disciplined rhythm of mass, prayer, and martial exercise. Yet, for the knights, this was not cruelty. It was salvation, a divine mission that justified every conquest, every blooded battle, every shivering prisoner. The campaigns were not without strategy. The Teutonic Knights mastered siege warfare, river crossings, and the manipulation of alliances among local tribes. They exploited divisions, turned enemies against each other, and struck with surgical precision. Within decades, vast swaths of Prussia were under their control, the wilderness yielding to an iron order, the forest giving way to castles, towns, and churches. Yet, the human cost was staggering. Entire communities were uprooted, populations decimated, and centuries of culture suppressed. The knights themselves endured harsh winters, disease, and relentless warfare. Life in the Baltic demanded rigor, sacrifice, and absolute devotion. Brothers who faltered or disobeyed were punished, sometimes with exile, sometimes with death. Loyalty was paramount, obedience sacred. The Order's survival depended on it. By the mid-13th century, the Teutonic Order had transformed the Baltic into a realm shaped in their image. Rivers, forests, and villages all bore the imprint of the cross and the sword. The knights had not merely conquered, they had established a disciplined society, a theocratic state where faith, law, and military might were inseparable. Prussia was no longer pagan land. It was the Order's realm, a kingdom ruled by warriors who prayed as fiercely as they fought. And yet, despite their power, shadows lingered. Neighboring kingdoms watched warily, ever alert to the expansion of a brotherhood that wielded both religious and military authority. The Order's rise was meteoric, but every victory planted the seeds of future conflict. As they consolidated their rule, one truth became clear. The Teutonic Knights were no longer mere soldiers of God. They were rulers, lawmakers, and, inevitably, targets of resentment and resistance. The march to the Baltic was complete. Forests had fallen, rivers had been crossed, and pagan lands had been subdued. The Teutonic Order had emerged, not just as a military force, but as an empire forged in faith and steel, a testament to the terrifying discipline and devotion that would define them for centuries to come. The sword and the cross, ritual, discipline, and devotion in the cold halls of stone fortresses, echoes of prayer mixed with the clash of steel. Here, mercy and massacre walked hand in hand. A brotherhood of faith and force had made the forest its cathedral, and the battlefield its sanctuary. To understand the Teutonic Order was to understand a world where devotion and discipline intertwined so tightly that one could not exist without the other. Every day began at dawn with the tolling of bells. Knights rose from their cold, hard beds, donned their simple robes beneath gleaming armor, and knelt in chapel halls that smelled of incense and iron. Their prayers were precise, recited with the same attention as their drills or swordsmanship. Every moment was structured, every action deliberate, every breath a testament to their vows. Their code was rigid, unwavering. Obedience to the Grand Master and to the Order itself was absolute. Personal ambition was subordinated to collective mission. Acts of disobedience were met with swift correction, for discipline was the lifeblood of the Order. Life was austere, food was simple, discipline was strict, and comfort was scarce. Yet this austerity was not punishment, it was preparation. Every hardship forged resilience, every ritual reinforced loyalty, every battle tested faith. Armor and weapons were sacred. The black cross on a white surcoat was more than a symbol, it was a declaration. Each knight's sword was tempered not just with fire, but with purpose. Every lance, every shield, every arrow carried the weight of the Order's mission. Knights trained tirelessly in formations, siege tactics, and mounted combat, perfecting the lethal dance between movement and force. Yet even amidst the rigor of combat training, the spiritual foundation remained unbroken. Each swing of a sword, each charge across a frozen plain, was imbued with divine intent. Castles were both home and fortress. High walls protected against enemy incursions, while within, hospitals and chapels reflected the Order's dual nature. Sick and wounded could find solace and care, yet intruders faced merciless defense. In these stone bastions, life was a rhythm of prayer, labor, and readiness. Knights, sergeants, and servants moved in coordinated harmony, an echo of the military precision that would define the Order's campaigns. Yet for all their discipline, the Teutonic Knights were men as well as symbols. They celebrated victories with solemn feasts, honored the dead with ritual, and sought counsel in quiet reflection. The brotherhood was tightly knit. Trust and loyalty were forged in shared danger, in nights of frost and fear, in battles where survival demanded absolute reliance on one another. They were monks in robes of steel, warriors with hearts devoted to God, men whose lives were a paradox of gentleness and ferocity. It was this paradox that made the Order both revered and feared. To the people of Prussia and Livonia, the knights were saviors and oppressors. Pagan tribes who converted could find protection under the Order's laws. Those who resisted faced relentless campaigns of destruction. Mercy and terror were two sides of the same coin, wielded with strategic intent. And as their dominion expanded, this disciplined duality became their defining characteristic, a balance of faith, force, and governance that few could match. In the quiet of the night, when the battles were over and the fires of the fortress burned low, the knights prayed. They prayed for courage, for victory, for guidance. They prayed for strength, for discipline, for mercy in a world that offered little. And in that prayer, the essence of the Teutonic Order revealed itself, a brotherhood forged in faith, tempered in war, and dedicated to a vision that was as terrifying as it was divine. The sword and the cross were inseparable, as were faith and force. Through this duality, the Teutonic Knights carved their legacy into the lands they conquered, leaving a mark that would endure through centuries, a testament to the power of devotion forged in steel. Clash with Poland and Lithuania. Rising tensions and epic battles. Empires clash not merely over land, but over destiny. And in the shadowed forests and rolling plains of Eastern Europe, the Teutonic Order would confront foes who would test their faith, their steel, and their unyielding discipline. By the late 13th and early 14th centuries, the Teutonic Order had consolidated its power in the Baltic, transforming Prussia and Livonia into a network of fortified cities, castles, and commanderies. Yet, with power came opposition. Neighboring kingdoms, particularly Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, viewed the Order's expansion with suspicion and fear. The Order was no longer a brotherhood of healers or a regional army. It had become a state within a state, a militant theocracy whose ambition stretched beyond the forests and rivers it had subdued. Tensions escalated as the knights sought to enforce their authority over trade routes, towns, and neighboring lands. Raids and counter-raids became common, each side testing the strength and resolve of the other. The Order's discipline and tactics were formidable. Heavily armored knights in tight formations, relentless cavalry charges, and strategic use of fortifications made them a deadly force. Yet the Poles and Lithuanians were not easily defeated. United by necessity, they adopted guerrilla tactics, ambushing supply lines, striking swiftly, and retreating into forests that confounded the knights' formations. The conflict was as much ideological as it was territorial. The Teutonic Order cast itself as the defender of Christianity, portraying the pagan Lithuanians as heathens in need of conversion, while Poland sought to protect its lands and assert its sovereignty. Propaganda, religious authority, and military might intertwined, each battle echoing beyond the battlefield into the halls of kings and popes. By the early 15th century, tensions erupted into full-scale war. The Battle of Grunwald, also known as Tannenberg, was on the horizon, a confrontation that would determine the fate of the Baltic region. The Order, confident in its superior training and disciplined knights, faced a coalition of Polish and Lithuanian forces that had learned from years of resisting Teutonic campaigns. The stage was set on the rolling plains near the village of Grunwald in 1410, a battlefield that would soon become legendary. As the two armies assembled, the air was thick with anticipation. Flags fluttered in the wind, trumpets blared, and the ground trembled under the march of tens of thousands of soldiers. On one side, the Teutonic knights stood in gleaming armor, their black crosses stark against white surcoats, disciplined to the last man. On the other, the Polish-Lithuanian coalition combined cavalry, infantry, and lightly armored archers, their banners a kaleidoscope of color and defiance. The clash was catastrophic. Arrows darkened the sky, swords rang against shields, and the ground became a mire of mud, blood, and broken lances. The Order's disciplined formations faced unexpected flexibility from their opponents, and despite their valor, the knights struggled against the sheer numbers and cunning of the coalition. By day's end, the battlefield was littered with the fallen, and the Teutonic Order had suffered a devastating defeat. Grunwald was more than a military loss. It was a turning point in the Order's history. Their aura of invincibility was shattered, and their northern empire, though still formidable, faced growing challenges. Poland and Lithuania had not only defended their lands, but had shown that faith and steel could be countered with unity, strategy, and resilience. Yet even in defeat, the Teutonic Order endured. Their castles remained, their cities stood, and their brotherhood persisted. Lessons were learned, strategies were adapted, and the Order continued to rule with a blend of faith and force. The clash with Poland and Lithuania demonstrated that their rise was not inevitable, that power could be contested, and that the greatest battles were fought not only on the fields but in the hearts and minds of those who wielded the cross and the sword. The stage was set for the twilight of their dominance, a period where the Order would face internal challenges, political pressure, and the slow erosion of their once unquestioned authority. Yet, even as their invincibility waned, their legacy, built in faith, forged in steel, remained indelible. The Battle of Grunwald and the Order's decline, triumph and tragedy. Some battles are more than clashes of steel. They are collisions of destiny, faith, and ambition. Grunwald was such a battle, a day when the might of the Teutonic Order met the fury of a united Poland and Lithuania, and the world would remember the echoes of swords and cries for centuries to come. July 15th, 1410. The plains near Grunwald were alive with tension. Sunlight glinted off polished armor, banners fluttered violently in the summer wind, and the earth itself seemed to hold its breath. On one side, the Teutonic Order arrayed its forces in disciplined ranks, tens of thousands of soldiers who had been drilled to perfection, their black crosses a symbol of authority, power, and divine purpose. On the other, the Polish-Lithuanian coalition, a diverse army of knights, archers, and infantry, stood ready to challenge the Northern Crusaders. The battle began with the roar of cavalry and the storm of arrows, a maelstrom of chaos that belied the calculated precision of the Teutonic formations. At first, the knights advanced with relentless discipline, their lances piercing lines of enemy soldiers, their banners unbroken. But the coalition's flexibility, cunning tactics, and sheer numbers began to turn the tide. Flanking maneuvers, ambushes from hidden forests, and the coordination between Polish and Lithuanian forces disrupted the rigid formations of the knights. 4 hours, the battle raged. The clash of steel echoed like thunder, the cries of the wounded and dying filled the air, and the ground became a quagmire of mud, blood, and broken weapons. Commanders on both sides rode through the chaos, rallying troops, issuing orders, and shaping the flow of battle in a deadly dance of strategy and courage. The Teutonic knights fought with ferocity, each brother bound by oath, each action a blend of devotion and duty, yet even their legendary discipline could not overcome the overwhelming pressure. The turning point came when the Order's lines began to falter under the sustained assault. Towers of cavalry were broken, banners fell, and knights who had once seemed invincible were struck down in the dust. Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen, leading from the front, fell in combat, a symbol of the Order's shattered prestige. By the end of the day, the battlefield belonged to Poland and Lithuania, and the Teutonic Order, though still standing as an institution, had suffered a humiliation that would echo through the centuries. Grunwald was more than a loss. It was a moment that revealed the vulnerabilities of a once mighty empire. Fortresses remained, castles stood, and the Order retained territories, yet the myth of invincibility had been destroyed. Political rivals sensed weakness, internal dissent simmered, and the Order's power, though formidable, was no longer absolute. The Baltic would remain under their influence, but the path ahead was fraught with challenges. The decline was gradual but inexorable. Wars continued, resources were stretched, and the changing political landscape of Europe shifted attention away from crusades and conquest toward diplomacy, trade, and nation-building. The once feared knights adapted, shifted focus, and began to govern rather than conquer, to administer rather than wage endless war. The Order's identity evolved, becoming less about expansion and more about maintaining authority, law, and tradition within their territories. Yet, even in decline, the legacy of the Teutonic Knights endured. Their castles, churches, and cities stood as monuments to a brotherhood that had combined faith and force in a way unmatched by any other medieval order. Their influence on the social, political, and military development of the Baltic region was profound. They were architects of an empire that had shaped history, leaving behind a story of devotion, discipline, and the intertwining of mercy and terror. Grunwald was a reminder that even the mightiest fall, yet history is rarely about finality. The Teutonic Order would continue to navigate the currents of power, adapting to survive, until their presence faded into the echoes of legend. And though their dominance waned, the story of their rise, their discipline, and their unyielding devotion remained, etched into the chronicles of Europe and into the imagination of generations to come.